Champions. I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer with the Marriage Initiative, and I am just delighted to introduce you to speakers and authors Sean and Lanette Reed, founders of Legacy Maker International, which help couples navigate life's inevitable changes and transition well together. The Reeds speak at churches and marriage events, including XO Marriage, Spark Lakewood Marriage Conferences, and Focus on the Family gatherings. They are podcast hosts and authors of books Not Just Roommates and Marriage in Transition, Creating Connection Through Uncontrollable Change. As certified mediators, Sean and Lanette work one-on-one coaching premarital and married couples, encouraging them they can overcome life's challenges and enjoy a fulfilling marriage and life. Sean and Lanette, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having us. Super grateful to be here with you.
Oh, well, we are too. Well, tell us your story. Change. It hits all of us, but how did you become experts in that?
Oh, buddy.
Because it seems like there's a change every 6 months in our lives.
Yeah. If we go all the way back to the beginning, the first real baptism into change was that we were dating in high school. She got pregnant before we graduated. We graduated in June, got married in September on the 5th, and then we had our first child December the 5th. So
that's a lot all at once.
It's a lot of change. So while we were, while most people are just thinking about going to college, we were thinking about college and work and a baby. And then within the next 2 years, we added 2 more kids. So by the time we were 22, we were newly married with 3 kids. Yeah. And so when you start talking about, going through changes and transitions of life, we learned a few things.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and somehow you were involved with church staff and ministry throughout that time too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's always been, I think that was one of the core values that brought us together was our faith. And so that kind of held us together, especially early on. We had a greater commitment to the vow that we made to the Lord. And that's what held us together during those times of transition and arguing and challenges and all of that. But of course, that volunteer mindset grew to where as we were developed just personally in our relationship with the Lord, we came on staff at churches in the area of praise and worship and admin and leadership.
We have a very musical family. So it's actually how we met. We met through choir. And so we were singing, leading worship, and then eventually we were groomed, mentored to lead a pastor, to become a lead pastor. And so we planted a church in 2005 in Fort Worth, Texas. And the church was Crossroads, and it's still going to this day. We handed it off in 2019, and we became marriage and family pastors at a church for a while. And so, so she and I, we've gone through a lot of seasons of change. I will say one of the things, speaking to the fact that we were on church staff at that time, we really didn't have a Sean and Lanette to go to. We didn't have someone that could help us to navigate the pressures of parenting, transitioning, grieving, because we had lost some loved ones kind of successively at that time. And we didn't really have someone to turn to at that time, but we were in ministry. And one of the things I think that some people are, bound by, especially in the church world, is shame. And I think that there was a level of shame in the sense of feeling like if somebody knew what was actually going on in our marriage, what would they think? Would we still be qualified? Because we were really struggling.
Yeah.
And yet we needed a breakthrough in that area. And so we ended up going through I'll start with myself first. I started going through some inner healing classes. One in particular was Celebrate Recovery, that just helped me to overcome, I think, some bouts with anger. I had some very controlling issues. I was a controlling individual.
Yes.
I think I had a spirit of perfectionism. And so it wasn't just excellence. It was more so perfectionism in my life. So I think I was so driven that it caused so much friction between us at that time in communication. So we really needed help. I think after going through that it began to shape my perspective of the value and the importance of being able to get some real deep inner healing individually, so that you are better complementary when it comes to your marriage. And so,
and I love how you mentioned that you kind of stumbled upon Celebrate Recovery because the pastor was like, hey, I'm going to bring this to the church, so you look at it.
Yeah.
Just felt it just spoke so much. It was so meaningful to you.
Absolutely. Yeah. He just kind of dropped the box in my lap. I was just like, teach this. And I was like,
what is it?
Sure.
Yeah.
But man, changed my life. I mean, it created within us this thought process that not only was God part of our lives, but he needed to be the center. And that scripture, I think, provides for us a roadmap to inner healing that really is rooted in our identity. And so what we've found over the years of coaching couples, we've seen the difference between a couple that goes to church and a couple that has an identity that's rooted in Christ, according to grace and his mercy and according to his truth. And when you see a husband that's walking, I mean, in a place of inner healing and being able to say that he has a direct connection to where God is his source and God is filling him in a sense to where he feels like he's enough and he has vision from the Lord, then it makes it to where the heavy weights that he would put on his wife in order for himself to be happy, those weights get lifted off. And it totally transformed the relationship.
Oh, well, and you said that it spilled out so much, like you said, and transformed your relationship.
Absolutely.
You created your own workshop and you started ministering to singles, kind of created an impromptu house church with a lot of singles who started getting married, right?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, they did. Our church was full of singles. And so we just kind of did what we knew best, and it was really to strengthen them while they're on their journey, and teaching them how to date in a very healthy way. And as they begin to do that, they started getting in relationships, and then we kind of started coaching them in their relationships, and then they got married, and then we started coaching them in their marriage. And before you knew it, our singles ministry was called Single and Sold Out, and we had very little singles.
They all sold out.
They all sold out.
They did.
And then we had to really strengthen them in their marriage. And so that small group really was the birthplace of our marriage ministry. And it was fun, and it was engaging, and it was very intimate. And so
it was called Not Just Roommates. And from that's when we wrote the book, Not Just Roommates. Which helps couples to discover a vision and value for their lives. And it shares a lot of in-depth wisdom that we learned, especially in the first 5 years of our marriage, because, man, it was dysfunctional.
It's like a little handbook.
And so that's how we ended up beginning, I guess you could say, the journey of traveling, because after we did that workshop and wrote the book, other churches started reaching out to us and bringing us in to host workshops and conferences. And so we've been doing that ever since.
Well, I love that Not Just Roommates. It's still in print and still around and still very valuable. And I'm just thinking that would be a great thing if anyone knows a newlywed couple and I'm thinking of some in my family that might hand that off to as being a good example. Now, kind of transitioning from the Not Just Roommates and the pre-marrieds and that, then you really started looking at the biblical values and the wisdom and the life changes. Let's talk about that, because that's really an area that nobody addresses, but especially, being in midlife myself, and we just both commiserated at our grown children leaving the nest and flying farther away than we ever imagined. These things happen, and there can be some grief. A song hit me I was doing my goofy exercise video with the bike, and all of a sudden this song, and I was just like, it happens.
We were going through, it was interesting because we were in a good spot in our relationship. We were in a healthier place than we had ever been. Things were doing well, I think, in our lives. But then we would notice that seasonally, we would have a friction that would just come back as if we never grew out of a past stumbling area or a past area of friction. And so it was frustrating to me. So I remember one day I was sitting down and I was thinking, and I asked Lanette to come up to the little loft where we were sitting in our house, and we started having a conversation on like the cycle. It's almost like a repeated cycle that would create this friction between us to where it didn't seem like we were making progress, like growing to the next level. And then that's when we started thinking through this concept, and it was like, you know what? The last time we had this problem, this same type of behavior came up between us. And then we started recognizing that there was this pattern that you may leave out of or transition out of one season of pain in your life or even success, but not come back together as a team to fully heal or to rejoice or to be able to say, okay, that chapter is closed.
How do you feel about that?
How do you feel about it? And there's this empathetic connection that needs to happen whenever you're going through life's transitions.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, usually the pain from the past especially is going to find itself echoing into your future, and it'll resurface when you see something similar to it in the future.
The easiest example could be a kid leaving home, right? Something that you and I are definitely experiencing right now. So one parent can be very sorrowful. It could be hard on them. Usually sometimes it's the mom, but not all the time. But, you know, there's a void that's going to take place and mama is feeling it. Whereas sometimes the man or the dad is like, yes, get out, freedom, right? So they're dealing with the same transition very differently. And we rarely come together to discuss how one another is feeling.
Yeah.
And so as you move on, one is trying to live their life and have a good time, where the other one is grieving.
Yeah.
And so that can actually cause some tension.
That will cause tension.
And fast forward, if something of a similar event takes place, or a reminder happens to kick in, that sorrow can come back.
Right. So like a way, if I tell her when she's kind of grieving or she's keeping to herself because of that transition, and I tell her, hey, you're overreacting. You know, you're being too emotional, you know, and that, yeah. So in the future, if I say something like that, then I've shamed her for having, you know, a response to something that's real for her.
Yeah.
And then let's say we get into the future. Now we're talking about a financial decision or a financial move. Should we buy this house? And we're having a conversation about it. And I may say something like, hey, let's not be so emotional. The moment that I say that, that's going to trigger the exact same feelings. So we can't move forward because we've never gotten closure from how we reacted differently in the past. And this happens over and over again. Moving to a new city, aging parents, and what's going to be the plan. Yeah, birth of a child. This can happen with a good job. You can get promoted on a job, and that promotion requires usually more of your time. It requires more of your attention. So all of a sudden, something that's like, yay, we can pay bills. It also may mean simultaneously, we're going to have a lot less time together. And are we going to meet together to discuss how we're going to date now that both of us are working more rigorous schedules? Or just, I guess my celebratory was like, yes, please.
Yay! I love it. That was so cute.
That was like on time. So we gotta love emojis. And so like the whole process of, you know, when we started discussing this, we were thinking to ourselves like, hey, this is huge. No one ever told us about this. No one prepared us for transitions within the relationship. And that's why we wrote the book, Marriage in Transition.
Yeah. And you mentioned too that, you know, if you don't process, and especially when something happens, it can really shine a light on where you have dysfunction or unhealthy communication in the first place. Because maybe you're just kind of going along and getting along, and then something happens, like you said, good or bad. And then boom, you realize that you can slip and react to the circumstance. And I love, you said in an interview that the unresolved trauma would echo its way into their future.
Yeah.
You don't want that. And you don't want that for the people that you talk to.
Yeah, we become triggered easily. And so, you know, this kind of segues into a little bit to me of what we see within most of the couples that we coach. So when we lead couples in intensives, they're either 1 or 2 day intensives. We prefer two because that gives us plenty of time to work with the couple through several topics. But what we've discovered is that we weren't alone in the marriage and transition thing. And we've had couples that in the name of, as you said, going along to getting along, that type of thing, they will have had something that was a traumatic event 12 years ago, and they never had a conversation about it. They've never resolved it. But then the husband or the wife would talk about it as if it happened yesterday.
Yeah, very fresh.
And it's not just, and I don't know, for some people, it's like, oh, that's unforgiveness. It's not just unforgiveness. It's not being seen. It's not being seen. And in some ways, you've suppressed yourself.
Yeah.
And so what happens is a lot of times couples are finding themselves for the first time in a long time having a safe space in our presence to be able to share what it is that they're actually going through.
And the other spouse is absolutely surprised. And so we'll end up spending a good 30, 45 minutes just allowing that person to share, to give their feedback, to express to their spouse how they feel. And we end up working through this problem that actually heals the current problem. And so, yeah, just really be in a habit of having empathetic communication and vulnerable communication to where during those transitions you feel, or a spouse can feel free enough to be able to share what they're feeling.
Problem is, most of us haven't been taught how to have empathetic communication.
Right.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because you really explained that to me, because you said that's one of the hardest things to teach couples. So let's see if we can tackle that, because that is like one of the things that you really get down with. And I do want to give a plug, as you said, when you do your coaching and counseling, you guys are one-on-one. You really take time with and couples can find you. We've got lots of ways they're going to be able to find your resources, but they can find you and do that one-on-one coaching with you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
At SeanandLanette.com, they can find all our resources. We have courses and all types of things to help couples out. But when we start talking about empathy, oh man.
Yeah. If I could boil everything, just bring everything and say, what is the hardest lesson for couples to grasp? It would be empathy.
Yeah. And part of it is because it requires you to humble yourself. And I know that sounds weird, but it really does require you to humble yourself to where it's not just about you and your side of the story, but it's you being patient enough to where the problem isn't the priority, the other person is. When the problem is the priority, it's about who's right and who's wrong. It's about who answered it first. It's about who's smarter. Yeah. So it's always a raising up of oneself. You're exalting yourself above the other person. And so when we start talking about empathy, it requires me to slow down, take a deep breath, hear what the other person has to say, try to see it from their perspective, and then try to respond in a way that affirms the fact that their experience is real. And I might not even agree with it, but I can literally in some way show you that what you said mattered because you matter to me. And then we connect on that level.
Yeah. The hardest thing is getting couples to separate their spouse from the problem. Right. And most people see or identify the problem as the spouse as the problem.
Yeah.
Versus we are a couple and we have this problem that we need to deal with, right? We're dealing with this problem together. So that is probably the first hurdle in empathetic communication, is separating the individual from the problem and realizing, hey, we're married, we love one another, we're on the same team, but we just have this problem that we have to deal with.
Yeah. And it's hard to graduate to that place that she's describing, where if we are frustrated because let's say it's a financial situation and the couple's disagreeing on what to do financially, should we have the same bank account? Should we keep it separate? Or should we be able to spend freely? Or should we be on a tight budget? all of a sudden a lot of feelings get involved on what's the right way.
The right, who's right.
Exactly. Yes. So it's personalized now. So then so if I can't do it my way, which in my own perspective, I think it's the right way, then you are hindering us, primarily me, from being able to get what I want. So then at that point, I will say this person's the problem. And if you keep going through that consecutively, all of a sudden a person begins to question, are we compatible?
Yeah.
Do we belong together? Can we ever find happiness? And the real heart of the matter is we have a problem differentiating the issues that you're working on together from the person. And then separately, if you're ever going to bridge that gap, you have to learn to love this person through your communication.
Yeah.
And that's what we teach couples to do.
Well, and I love that you talk about the communication, because that's one of your things. You have a system of that. So let's talk about that, because that is one of the things. Once they're kind of separating themselves from the problem, then they have you have a system to do that. So let's talk about that.
So typically we would go through the talk method, and the talk method is fun because it gives you a step-by-step. Here's what to do when you're triggered. Before you say something you're going to regret, or before we have a heated argument, or before we shut down and stop communicating with the other person, before we do something that's going to further perpetuate the same dysfunctional communication.
Or sometimes we can say things that we really don't mean. So before that happens, go through this process. So
the T stands for timeout. And that's where you would actually go away to be able to, what we call processing God's presence. It's not just you getting away from the problem to let cooler heads prevail. I think on the very surface level, that's a reality. It's to come down, if we're talking medically, the reality is you need at least 30 minutes to come down out of an adrenaline rush. And so it's not good to continue to press in because I really need an answer from you. Or you're so afraid that if you give them a few minutes to think about it, because they won't return back to the conversation, you're going to lose this moment.
No.
But the truth is, if they're triggered, you've lost it already. So it's like, take a break, tell them how long of a break you need, and then you're going to reconnect at a later time after you take the time out, you process in God's presence, and then the A stands for assess your heart. And the purpose of assessing your heart is being able to get to the root of what you're feeling. And to get to a place to where you truly understand, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling, and why do I want to contribute negatively to this situation?
This part is very important, because it's asking yourself, okay, what am I bringing to the table that is causing this heated debate? Or what am I thinking? We really never have an opportunity throughout our day, whether we're triggered or not, to be able to set aside time to think our own thoughts. And assessing your heart gives us the time and place to be able to question what we're thinking. Is this am I going down a good path? Is this healthy thinking? Or am I really emotional right now? Is my perspective a healthy perspective? Or is it just, am I just really emotional? So really assessing your heart gives you an opportunity to have a holistic perspective concerning yourself.
And so we actually, in our training, we have a course online where we take people through the talk method. But we also, in our intensives, we teach people the talk method. And one of the things that we do is we help them to, now this is going to sound like a lot, but we actually have them write down a statement of what it was that they were experiencing during that time. What did God show you while you took your time out and while you were assessing your heart? So it may be when you walked past me after coming home from work and didn't speak to me, but went straight to the bedroom, I felt rejected. And as a result, I realized that I became angry and sarcastic. So when you walked out the bedroom, I snapped at you because of that. And so we're trying to get to the root of it. And then that leads to the L. After they've come up with that statement, it's listen and share, which is where both of you all agree to come back together to both share
in an empathetic vulnerable atmosphere.
Yeah.
Where you say, I don't have to agree with you, but I love you, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. And then you're able to share. But I'm telling you something, it's something magical happens when you actually have gotten to the root of the belief. And what you'll find is these couples will sit down with each other and they're like, wait, is that what you thought I meant? And it's like, no, that's not what I meant. I was just trying to say this. And it's like, oh, okay, we good. You know, so it's like listen and share. And then the last part is after both have exchanged empathetically, then we get to the point where the K in the talk is keep it together. So the goal is to say, how do we either prevent this from happening in the future, or how can we better circumvent these types of issues? How do we learn from this and build who's going to do what by when, right? So if the debate was over who's going to take out the trash or a chore list, who's going to do what by when, we're going to reach a point of what's your perspective, what's mine, how do we work together to build a good picture of how we're going to resolve the conflict.
And sometimes it could be developing safeguards in our relationships, right? Maybe a next step is this is a little deeper than what we thought. We may need to go to counseling.
Right.
So it could be something as simple as who's going to do what by when, but it could also be something as serious as, okay, we need some safeguards.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's one way that you can help, because this actually is the topic of your newest book that's coming out, and also the course, as well as what you do in your counseling. But it grew out of your most popular webinar, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. So we did the talk webinar and it was fun.
Yeah.
We had a lot of couples that they had a lot of questions on the process. But it was fun. And I will say this about, and I know it may seem a little off topic, but Lanette and I, we love to have fun. Even during the intensives, like it is a very powerful emotional experience. People get a lot out of them, but at the same time, we're going to have fun. You're going to laugh, you're going to learn. But we keep it real. And in that webinar, when we did it, it was free. It was fun. We had a lot of couples pop on there and we walked through this process. And I'm gonna tell you, one of the most interesting questions that people had was really a genuine concern was, well, what about the other person? What about the other person? Well, what if this person doesn't fully, take the time out, or so on and so forth? And I'm gonna say it right here and now. The truth is, your response is your responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's gonna be a lot of weight off of your shoulders, just being able to process your own emotions, as Lanette was saying, and to get to a place to where you're rightly aligned with God. It empowers you in such a way that you don't allow the conflict to dictate the condition of your heart. Yeah. And you grow into this place where it's like, you know what? I have a freedom. And this kind of takes us back to the beginning of the conversation, that freedom that comes in knowing that you've connected with God and received a healthy perspective. It empowers you.
Yeah. And you talked about, and this is leading us to, you talked about grit and generational health. That kind of leads you right there with when you're right. Can you unpack that just a smidge?
Ooh. Yeah, those two topics are probably our heartbeat when it comes to couples, because we are all about generational legacy. God is a God that thinks generationally, right? He knows the present, but he is totally focused on the next generation.
Absolutely.
And so when we take couples through an intensive, our goal is to help them realize that you've got your children's children thinking, to think about. They're counting on you. And so how can we, acknowledge maybe the pain of today, but also we need to move forward because they are counting on you. So really, really broadening the mindset of couples to think generationally.
Yeah. What's very unique about grit and legacy, to your point, when you're thinking about the big picture, when you have a clear picture of the future and you have the purpose to which you were brought together, it gives you that fortitude to say, our now will not exist in our future. This is temporary. This pain is also worth it because we're building something great. The Bible tells us that Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despised the shame, and he did what he had to do, even to the death on the cross. So it's like Christ was so compelled by the mission that he was sent to do that he was willing to endure hard things. And I think sometimes the lack of clarity leads to a sense of hopelessness, because if we don't know where we're going, we don't know what we're fighting for. So then those difficult moments just become like one added, like a difficult season, a trial, a sickness, financial distress, a new beginning, grief. Those things just add fuel to a fire that's already going. And it hinders the couple from being able to work together. So we're real big on, look, if you want to begin to see you guys brought tighter together, that's what vision does. One of the translations of where there's no vision, the people perish, it actually says where the people cast off restraint. Where there's no prophetic picture, people cast off restraint. The restraint idea is that it ties us together because we're on the same page, walking in the same direction. It keeps us bound together. And sometimes with couples, because there's no clear picture of where they're headed, they become frustrated and discontent with where they are, and they're more susceptible to quitting. So the grit for us is because of the fact that you've been called for a great purpose. Before you were born, God knew you. He has a hope and a future for you, big plans. Your family name matters. And what God wants to do in you successively is so much more important than the temporary struggle that you may be going through.
Yeah.
Oh, that is such a great word to end on, because that is right. What is your legacy is more important than what the struggle you're going through. So thank you, Sean and Lanette. It's so great to get to have you with us. We're so grateful you were here.
This is awesome.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
We love what you do. This is fantastic. This is an honor.
Well, and as always, Marriage Champions, if you'd like to find out more about the Reeds and the resources, you can reach us at marriageinitiative.org.